The chrome on Jake Morrison's Harley caught the afternoon sun like a warning as he rolled into the Shell station just outside Ashland, 6 bikes rumbling behind him. 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The kind of lazy spring day where nothing significant was supposed to happen. Jake cut the engine, and the sudden silence felt wrong, like the moment before thunder. He'd been riding for 11 years, leading the Iron Brotherhood MC for the last 5, and his instincts had kept him alive through situations that should have killed him twice over. Right now, those instincts were quiet. He swung off the bike, his leather vest settling against his shoulders with familiar weight, the Reaper patch on his back visible to anyone paying attention. Most people didn't pay attention to bikers unless they wanted trouble or were looking for protection. The kid was different, maybe 8 years old, skinny, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that seemed older than it should. He approached while Jake was filling the tank, his steps hesitant but deliberate, like he'd practiced this. "Mister, that's a really cool motorcycle," the boy said, his voice steady but his hands shaking. Jake looked down at him, noting the shadows under his eyes, the way he stood with his weight on his back foot, ready to run. "Thanks, kid." The boy nodded, moving closer. And that's when Jake saw his eyes, desperate, terrified, trying so hard to look normal. "My stepdad says they're dangerous," the boy continued, and his hand shot out, pressing something into Jake's palm before pulling back like he'd touched fire. Jake's fingers closed around crumpled paper, the texture rough against his calluses. A horn blared from the far pump, a silver sedan, a man behind the wheel with hard eyes and an impatient scowl. "Tommy, get back here, now." The boy's whole body flinched. "I gotta go," he whispered, and ran toward the sedan like a prisoner returning to his cell. Jake stood frozen, the fuel pump clicking off behind him, forgotten. He watched the sedan pull away, watched the boy's pale face turn back once through the rear window, watched until they disappeared around the bend on Highway 66. Then he opened his palm and read the note. 3 sentences in a child's careful handwriting, the letters pressed so hard they'd torn through in places. "Help me. 427 Pine Ridge Road. They won't let me leave." The paper trembled in Jake's hand, and for the first time in 5 years of leading men through fire, his heart hammered against his ribs like it wanted out. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Jake stared at the note for a full minute before Brick walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. "You good? Reaper? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jake didn't answer. He folded the note carefully and slid it into his vest pocket. But his mind was somewhere else, replaying the kid's face frame by frame like a film stuck on repeat. Something about those eyes, something familiar in the slope of his nose, the set of his jaw. The crew mounted up, and they rode the 12 miles to the clubhouse in formation, Jake leading but barely present, his body moving through the motions while his brain worked overtime. The Iron Brotherhood's clubhouse sat on 5 acres outside town, a converted warehouse that had seen better days but suited them fine. They rolled through the gate at 4:23 p.m., and Jake was off his bike before the kickstand was fully down. Inside, he went straight for Brick, pulling him into the office away from the others. "We got a situation," Jake said, spreading the note on the desk. Brick read it, his jaw tightening. Marcus Chen had been Jake's vice president for 3 years, a former Marine who'd seen combat in Kandahar and carried himself like a man who'd looked at death and found it boring. Nothing rattled Brick, except this note seemed to. "Local address," Brick said, already pulling out his phone. "We call the sheriff. Let them handle it." Could be a prank. Could be serious. But either way. "Wait," Jake interrupted. His hand was shaking slightly as he pulled out his own phone. That kid, there was something about him. He scrolled through his photos, past recent club runs and charity events, digging deeper into the archive he rarely visited. Past 2 years, past 5, past 10. His thumb stopped on a folder he hadn't opened in a decade. Brick watched as Jake's face went pale. "What is it?" The photo filled the screen, a woman with long dark hair and bright eyes, laughing at something off camera. Her head tilted in that way she used to do when she was genuinely happy. Sarah Winters. 12 years ago, back when Jake was 22 and stupid, and in love and convinced he could have everything. Before the arrest, before she disappeared, before his life split into before and after, Jake zoomed in on her face and his breath stopped. The eyes. The exact shape and color of the boy's eyes. The nose, the jawline. Even the way worry creased his forehead. It was Sarah's face on a child's body. "That kid at the gas station," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's got her face, Brick." "Exactly her face." Brick leaned in, looking between the photo and Jake. "Who is she?" Jake's hand closed around the phone. "Someone I loved. Someone who disappeared 12 years ago." His throat went tight. "Someone who was 2 months pregnant the last time I saw her." Jake set the phone down like it might shatter. But he couldn't stop looking at Sarah's face. The memories came whether he wanted them or not. Summer 2013. He was 22, riding with the Devil's Spawn MC out of Medford, running errands he didn't ask questions about because the money was good and he was young enough to think consequences happened to other people. Sarah worked at the diner on Main Street, brought him coffee with a smile that made him believe in things he'd stopped believing in. 3 months later, they were inseparable. 6 months after that, she stood in his apartment bathroom, holding a pregnancy test, crying, and he'd wrapped his arms around her and promised everything would be okay. He'd meant it. God, he'd meant it with everything he had. "I'll get clean," he'd told her, his hands on her face, her tears on his thumbs. "No more runs for the Spawn. I'll find real work. I'll be there. I swear to you, Sarah, I'll be there." She'd believed him. That was the worst part. Looking back, she'd actually believed him. 2 weeks later, Jake was in the back of a van with 3 other Spawn members when the cops pulled them over. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong goddamn life. They found guns in the back, unregistered, untraceable. Nothing to do with Jake, but everything to do with the company he kept. His public defender was overworked and underpaid. The judge was tired of seeing young men make the same mistakes. 6 months in county lockup, eligible for parole in 4. Sarah visited twice. The first time she was 3 months along, barely showing, still hopeful. The second time she was 5 months pregnant, exhausted, and Jake could see the hope dying in her eyes every time she looked at the bars between them. "I can't do this alone," she'd whispered. "I know, baby. I know. Just wait for me. 4 more months. I'll be out and we'll—" But she didn't wait. Jake got out on a Wednesday morning in January, took a bus back to Ashland with nothing but the clothes on his back and a heart full of plans. Sarah's apartment was empty. No furniture, no forwarding address, no note. The landlord said she'd left 2 weeks prior, paid through the end of the month. Didn't say where she was going. Jake had spent 3 years looking. Called every hospital, every clinic, every Sarah Winters in Oregon, Washington, California. Nothing. She'd vanished like smoke. And eventually he'd had to accept that she didn't want to be found. Now this boy, 8 years old. The math worked perfectly. The face was hers. And somewhere in this town, his son was asking strangers for help. Jake hit the gavel on the scarred wooden table at 5:15 p.m. The sound echoing through the clubhouse, like a gunshot. Church was sacred. You didn't call an emergency meeting unless someone was dead, dying, or about to be. 15 members filed into the room, their faces ranging from curious to concerned. Leather vests creaking as they settled into chairs. Brick closed the door and stood beside Jake. Arms crossed. Already knowing what was coming, Jake laid the note on the table, smoothed it flat with fingers that still trembled slightly. Got this from a kid about an hour ago, 8 years old. Gas station on Highway 66. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think he might be my son. The room went silent. Tiny leaned forward, his massive frame making the chair groan. "You got a kid you didn't tell us about?" "I didn't know," Jake said, pulling out his phone and showing them Sarah's picture. "His mother disappeared 12 years ago. She was pregnant when I went inside on that weapons charge. I looked for her for 3 years. Found nothing." He swiped to a rough sketch he'd made from memory of the boy's face. "This kid has her eyes, her nose, her whole damn face." And he slipped me a note begging for help. Chains, the oldest member at 62 with a gray beard down to his chest, picked up the note and read it aloud. 427 Pine Ridge Road. That's 15 minutes from here. "So, we call the cops," said Danny, Wrench Martinez, the club's mechanic and voice of caution. "Let them do a welfare check. We can't just storm a house because a kid passed a note." Jake's jaw clenched. "And if the cops show up, knock on the door, everything looks fine from the outside? Then what? Kid gets punished for asking for help, and we're back to square one?" "Or it's a prank," Wrench countered. "Or a trap. Or a custody dispute, and the kid's playing sides. We don't know anything." The room erupted in debate, voices overlapping. Everyone with an opinion. Jake stood there taking it, because they weren't wrong. He was asking them to risk everything on a hunch, on a face that looked like a ghost, on a promise he'd made 12 years ago to a woman who'd disappeared. Then Brick stood, and the room went quiet. When the VP stood during church, you listened. "Jake's never asked us for anything," Brick said, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "Not once in 5 years has he called church for personal business. He's bled for this club. He's taken bullets meant for some of us in this room. If he says that kid needs help, if he says that might be his son, then that's good enough for me." He turned to face Jake. "We get intel first. We do this smart. But we do this." He sat down. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Chains stood. "I'm in." Tiny stood. "In." One by one, all 15 members rose, a wave of leather and loyalty. Raven, the only woman in the room, spoke last. "We ride at dawn. Someone get me everything we can find on that address before then." Night settled over Ashland like a held breath. Jake drove his pickup instead of the Harley reconnaissance, required invisibility, and 1,500 pounds of chrome didn't do subtle. Brick rode shotgun, both of them in dark hoodies instead of their cuts, looking like anyone else on a Tuesday evening. Pine Ridge Road was exactly what its name promised, a tree-lined street in a neighborhood where lawns got mowed on schedule and HOA violations were serious business. Number 427 sat halfway down the block. A 2-story colonial with cream siding and black shutters. Jake's headlights swept across it as they passed the first time. Well-kept flower beds. A Honda Accord and a Ford Explorer in the driveway. Porch light glowing, warm and welcoming. It looked like a postcard of suburban normalcy. It looked exactly like the kind of place where terrible things happened behind closed doors because nobody ever suspected. They parked 3 houses down under a broken street light, the truck's cab going dark. Jake killed the engine, and they sat in silence, watching. 7:32 p.m. Lights on in what looked like the kitchen and living room. Shadows moved behind curtains, but nothing distinct, nothing actionable. A dog barked somewhere. A jogger passed, earbuds in, oblivious. The neighborhood breathed its evening routine around them, while Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. At 8:15, a smaller shadow crossed an upstairs window. Jake's hand shot out, gripping Brick's arm. "Second floor, left window." "Could be anyone," Brick said. But he was leaning forward, too. Eyes locked on the house. "Could be him." The hours crawled. Brick made quiet phone calls, gathering information, while Jake sat motionless, every muscle coiled tight. At 9:47 p.m., the front door opened and Jake's breath stopped. A man stepped onto the porch, tall, maybe 6'2", with the build of someone who worked out for intimidation rather than health. He stood there smoking a cigarette, and even from 3 houses away, Jake could read the aggressive set of his shoulders, the way he held himself, like he owned everything he surveyed. Then a woman's voice drifted through the night air, thin and pleading. "Derek, please." "He didn't mean." The man turned sharply. "Get inside." The door closed. For 30 seconds, Jake heard nothing. Then a thud, muffled but unmistakable. A woman's cry, cut short. Then silence, the kind that screamed louder than any sound. Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. His vision tunneled, every instinct howling at him to move. To act, to break down that door and end whatever was happening inside. Brick's hand landed on his shoulder, heavy and grounding. "We need more information," he said quietly. "We need to be smart about this. We go in there right now with nothing but a note and a hunch. We're the criminals. We need proof. We need leverage. We need to do this right, brother, or we lose him forever." Jake pulled out his phone with hands that had steadied now that he had a purpose. He scrolled to Chain's number and hit call. 3 rings. Then the gravelly voice of a man who'd spent 30 years wearing a badge before the job broke something inside him that the Brotherhood had helped put back together. "It's late? Reaper. This better be good. Need you to run an address for me. 427 Pine Ridge Road." Silence on the line, then the sound of chains moving, a chair scraping, a computer humming to life. "This? About that note?" "Yeah. Give me 10 minutes. Chains hung up. Jake and Brick sat in the dark truck, the house looming in Jake's peripheral vision like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. His phone buzzed at 10:03 p.m. "Got your information," Chains said without preamble. "Properties owned by Derek and Sarah Hartman. Purchased 3 years ago. She's listed as Sarah Hartman, but her maiden name on the mortgage application is Winters." The name hit Jake like a fist. Sarah Winters. She'd remarried, taken another man's name, built a life without him. "Derek Wayne Hartman, age 34. Chains continued, his voice dropping into that cop monotone that meant bad news was coming. "Sealed juvenile record, I can't access it, but I can see it exists. Which tells me enough. 2 domestic disturbance calls to this address in the past 18 months. Neighbors reported shouting, 'Possible physical altercation.' Officers responded both times. Spoke to the parties involved. No visible injuries, no arrests made." "No arrests," Jake repeated, the words tasting like ash. "No arrests," Chains confirmed. Sarah declined to press charges both times. Said it was just arguments getting heated. Officers noted she seemed nervous but cooperative. They flagged it in the system, but without her cooperation or visible evidence of abuse, their hands were tied. "You know how it goes if the victim won't testify. The case dies." Jake closed his eyes. The system had rules, procedures, protocols designed to protect people's rights. And sometimes those same rules let monsters operate in plain sight. "There's a child registered at the address," Chains added, his voice going quieter. "Thomas Hartman, age 8, enrolled at Bellevue Elementary. School records show he's missed 17 days this year. No medical documentation provided." 17 days. Jake's chest tightened. "Chains, I was a cop for 3 decades, Chains interrupted. "Saw cases like this more times than I can count. Systems designed to protect families, which means sometimes it protects the wrong person. That kid asked you for help, Jake. You showed me his picture. I see what you see." He paused. "Whatever you're planning, you didn't hear any of this from me. Officially, I ran nothing. But that boy needs help, and he needs it now. The system failed him. Don't let the Brotherhood fail him too." The clubhouse lights blazed at 4:30 a.m., casting long shadows across faces that hadn't seen sleep. Jake stood at the head of the table with the note in front of him, Chains intel printed out beside it, and 15 sets of eyes locked on him waiting for orders. The coffee was strong and black, the air thick with cigarette smoke and tension that hummed like a live wire. He'd called them in 3 hours ago, and every single member had shown up, some still pulling on their vests, all of them ready. "Here's what we know," Jake said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "The kid's name is Thomas Hartman. The mother is Sarah Winters, my Sarah. The stepfather is Derek Hartman, and he's got a history. 2 domestic calls, sealed juvie record, and a kid who's missed 17 days of school. He let that sink in. We go in there, guns blazing, we're criminals, kidnappers. Best case, we get arrested. Worst case, that bastard gets to keep hurting my son because we couldn't control ourselves. Wrench leaned forward. So what's the play? We need proof, Brick said from beside Jake. Visible evidence of abuse or neglect. Something that gives us legal standing. Tiny spoke up, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. What about a welfare check? Official looking. Someone goes to the door, assesses the situation. He scratched his beard. We got anyone who can pass for social services? The room went quiet, eyes scanning each other. 15 bikers, most of them covered in ink and scars, none of them exactly screaming Child Protective Services. Then Raven stood. Rachel Foster, 32, former EMT before she'd burned out on saving people who didn't want to be saved. She wore her hair pulled back, had exactly 3 visible tattoos, and could shift her whole demeanor from biker to soccer mom in 30 seconds. I'll go, she said. I've got the medical background. I can talk the talk. Get me a clipboard and some business casual clothes. I can pass. Jake studied her. You'd be going in alone if things go sideways. Then you're 3 blocks away, ready to move. She cut him off. I'm not stupid, Reaper. I assess the situation. Get eyes on the kid if possible. If I see visible injuries or immediate danger, I signal. Then you roll in with the cavalry. She pulled out her phone. I'll keep an open line. You'll hear everything. Brick nodded slowly. Could work. We stage nearby, out of sight. Raven goes in official, professional. If she confirms the kid's in danger, we've got probable cause. Jake looked around the table at faces that had become his family, at people willing to risk everything for a child they'd never met. We do this clean. We do this smart. And we bring that boy home. Raven pulled up to 427 Pine Ridge Road at exactly 8:15 a.m. in a borrowed Honda Civic, dressed in gray slacks and a white blouse that made her look like every overworked social worker who'd ever knocked on a door with bad news. The clipboard was real. The forms on it, authentic-looking forgeries that Chains had printed at 6 a.m. She wore small silver earrings that hid the wireless earpiece connecting her to Jake and the crew waiting 3 blocks south, engines idling, ready to move. Her heart hammered, but her face stayed calm, professional, slightly apologetic as she walked up the driveway and knocked on the door. 3 controlled raps, official but not aggressive. Morning sounds surrounded her, a dog barking, someone starting a lawnmower. Normal suburban Tuesday morning, sounds that felt obscene given what might be happening behind this door. Footsteps approached. The door opened 6 inches, and Raven found herself looking at a woman who'd been beautiful once and was now just tired. Sarah Hartman stood in the doorway wearing jeans and an oversized sweater despite the warming day. Her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that showed gray streaks at the temples. She was maybe 34, but looked 40. And there was a fading bruise near her left eye that makeup had tried and failed to fully conceal. Their eyes met, and Sarah's hands immediately went to the door frame, gripping it like she might fall without support. Yes? Her voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone who'd learned to weigh every word. Mrs. Hartman? I'm Rachel Foster with Child and Family Services. Raven held up a fake ID badge that would pass casual inspection. I'm following up on a concern raised by a school counselor at Bellevue Elementary regarding Thomas. May I come in for a few minutes? Sarah's face went pale. Her hands started trembling against the door frame. Tommy's fine. He has an active imagination sometimes. Kids, you know how they... Who is it? The male voice came from deeper in the house, sharp and demanding. Sarah flinched, a full-body reaction she tried to hide, but couldn't quite manage. Footsteps approached, and then Derek Hartman filled the space behind his wife. Tall and broad-shouldered, his hand landing possessively on Sarah's shoulder with enough pressure that Raven saw her wince. He looked at Raven with eyes that assessed and dismissed her in 2 seconds. "We don't need any help here," he said flatly. "This is harassment. You people always believing whatever some kid makes up at school." Raven held her ground, keeping her voice level and professional despite Derek's hand tightening on Sarah's shoulder, hard enough to leave marks. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Hartman, but this is standard protocol. I just need to see Thomas for a moment, verify he's healthy and safe. It'll take 5 minutes, and then I'll be out of your way." Derek's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. "You got a warrant?" "I don't need a warrant for a welfare check, sir. A school counselor has raised legitimate concerns about—" "Come back with a warrant," Derek interrupted, already pushing the door closed. "Until then, get off my property." That's when Raven saw him. Through the narrowing gap between door and frame, down the hallway past Derek's shoulder, a small face peered around the corner from what looked like the kitchen. Tommy, 8 years old, wearing a t-shirt 2 sizes too big, and his left eye was swollen completely shut, the flesh around it purple-black and fresh, maybe 12 hours old at most. The boy's good eye met Raven's for half a second, and she saw the same desperate plea that had been in the note Jake showed her. "Help me." Her hand moved to her ear, fingers brushing the hidden earpiece as if tucking back hair. "Code red," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Visible injuries. Permission to Derek's eyes narrowed, tracking her hand movement, and he slammed the door so hard the frame shook. The deadbolt clicked into place with the finality of a cell door closing. Raven stood on the porch for 3 seconds, breathing slowly, forcing herself to turn and walk calmly back to the Civic like she had all the time in the world. A concerned social worker who'd been denied access, nothing more, nothing threatening. She got in the car, started the engine, pulled away from the curb at a reasonable speed. 2 blocks away, she grabbed the radio clipped to her belt. "He's hurt," she said, and now her voice shook with fury barely contained. Fresh black eye, swollen shut. The woman's terrified, got a bruise she's trying to hide. That bastard had his hand on her like a threat the whole time. She took a breath. "Jake, that's your son in there, and he needs us now. We need to move." Jake's blood turned to ice in his veins. Every cell in his body screaming conflicting commands: run, fight, break, burn, save him. Sarah had kept his son, raised him for 8 years while Jake searched and grieved and learned to live with the hole in his chest. And she'd raised him with a man who put his hands on children, who left marks, who turned a home into a prison. His son had a black eye fresh enough that the swelling hadn't even peaked yet. His son had slipped a stranger a note begging for rescue because there was no one else. Brick's hand gripped his shoulder, but Jake barely felt it. He grabbed the radio with fingers gone numb. "Chains. Need legal cover now. Right goddamn now." Static crackled for 2 seconds that felt like hours. Then Chain's voice came through, calm and certain. "Already at the sheriff's office. Been here since 6 a.m. Jake heard papers shuffling, a door closing. "Deputy Robert Miller owes me. I pulled his daughter out of a trafficking ring last year, got her into rehab, kept her name out of the news. He's been waiting for a chance to pay that debt." More voices in the background, muffled conversation. "Miller's agreeing to accompany you for an official welfare check." He saw Raven's report, heard the recording of her door approach. Kid with visible fresh injuries, mother showing signs of abuse, hostile male preventing access to the child, that's probable cause. He'll meet you at Pine Ridge and Miller in 3 minutes with legal authority to enter that residence. The line went quiet for a beat. "Jake, bring your son home." Jake looked at Brick, at Tiny, at the 14 other members of the Iron Brotherhood MC, who'd rolled out of bed before dawn for a child they'd never met. "Mount up," he said, his voice carrying across the parking lot like a battle cry. "We ride now." 15 Harleys roared to life simultaneously, the sound rolling across Ashland like thunder announcing a storm. They pulled out in formation, Jake at the point, the Reaper on his back visible to everyone they passed. Behind them, Deputy Miller's cruiser fell into position. Lights off, but present, Legal authority wrapped in steel and leather. They rolled down Main Street at exactly the speed limit, turned onto Pine Ridge Road at 8:47 a.m., and the neighborhood stopped breathing. 15 bikes, 1 sheriff's deputy, and a father who'd waited 12 years to keep a promise. This day would be remembered. The thunder of 15 Harleys shook windows on Pine Ridge Road at exactly 9:03 a.m. Curtains twitched in every house as neighbors emerged onto porches, some holding coffee mugs, others with phones already out recording. The bikes lined both sides of the street in perfect formation, engines cutting one by one until silence fell like a hammer, heavy and expectant. Jake dismounted first, his boots hitting pavement with purpose, every muscle in his body coiled tight. Deputy Miller stepped forward from his cruiser, official and authoritative in his tan uniform. But Jake and Brick flanked him like wolves, flanking their alpha, the message clear this was happening with or without the badge. They approached 427 Pine Ridge Road together. 3 men with different authorities but the same mission. Miller's hand rested on his duty belt as he knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed. "Sheriff's Department. Open up. We need to speak with you regarding Thomas Hartman." Silence from inside. Jake counted his heartbeats. 5, 6, 7. Then Derek's voice came through the door, muffled but defiant. "You got a warrant? Because unless you do, you're trespassing." Miller's jaw tightened. "Mr. Hartman, we have reasonable cause to believe a child in this residence is in immediate danger. We have a report from a social worker who observed visible injuries less than an hour ago. You can open this door voluntarily, or we're coming in. Your choice." Movement inside now, footsteps, voices rising. Sarah's voice, high and desperate. "Derek, please, just let them." "Shut up!" Derek's shout carried through the walls. "This is harassment. I know my rights." "You can't just..." Then a smaller voice, a child's voice that Jake felt in his bones. "Please, I want to go with..." A sharp crack, skin on skin, unmistakable. A child's cry, sudden and pained, cut off mid-sound like someone had clamped a hand over his mouth. Jake moved before thought, his shoulder dropping. But Brick and Miller both grabbed him, holding him back by sheer force. "Not yet," Miller hissed. "Let me." He raised his voice. "Mr. Hartman, I just heard what sounded like a physical assault on a minor. Open this door now, or I'm authorizing forced entry." His hand went to his radio. "Dispatch, this is Miller. Requesting backup at 427 Pine Ridge Road. Exigent circumstances. Child welfare emergency." He looked at Jake, nodded once. The legal cover was complete. Whatever happened next, they had the law behind them. The door flew open so hard it bounced off the interior wall. Derek Hartman stood in the doorway with Tommy gripped by the upper arm, the boy's small body positioned in front of him like a human shield. The child's left eye was swollen completely shut, purple and black, and fresh blood trickled from his split lower lip. He was shaking. "See? He's fine," Derek said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Just a clumsy kid who fell. Tell them, Tommy. Tell them you're fine." Tommy's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His one good eye, brown and terrified, locked onto Jake's face with recognition that went bone deep, instinctive. The way a drowning person recognizes air. Jake stepped forward, pulling off his sunglasses slowly. And everything else fell away, the deputy, the bikes, the neighbors, the entire world narrowing to this moment. Behind Derek, Sarah appeared in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. She looked toward the door, and her eyes found Jake's face. The gasp that tore from her throat sounded like something breaking. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she stumbled backward against the wall. 12 years collapsing into nothing. "Jake?" His name came out broken, disbelieving, a prayer and an accusation all at once. Derek's head whipped toward her, eyes narrowing. "You know this thug?" Sarah's legs gave out and she slid down the wall, crying now, great racking sobs that shook her whole body. Tommy's his father. Jake is Tommy's father. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Derek's face went through a series of transformations: confusion, realization, then rage so pure it seemed to radiate off him like heat. "That bastard kid isn't mine," he snarled, his grip tightening on Tommy's arm until the boy whimpered. "And he never lets me forget it. Every time I look at him, I see another man's." He yanked Tommy closer, using him as a barrier. "You think you can just roll up here with your biker trash and take what I've been feeding and housing for 2 years? He owes me," Tommy cried out, a small, broken sound, and Jake saw red. Jake's voice dropped to a tone that made grown men step back. Deadly calm, each word precise as a blade. "Let my son go." The air itself seemed to freeze. Deputy Miller's hand moved toward his weapon, but he held position, recognizing that sometimes the law needed a moment to let justice speak first. Sarah collapsed against the doorframe like a puppet with cut strings. 12 years of secrets tearing out of her between sobs that sounded like they were being ripped from her chest. "I kept him," she gasped, her hands clawing at the wall for support. "I kept the baby, Jake. I tried to do it alone for 5 years. I worked 3 jobs. Lived in a studio apartment. Tommy slept in a drawer because I couldn't afford a crib." Her voice cracked. "But I got so tired, so broke, so depressed I couldn't see straight anymore. I thought about—" She couldn't finish that sentence. "I met Derek at the diner where I was waitressing. He seemed stable, employed, kind. He said he'd take care of us both." She looked at Derek with something between hatred and exhausted resignation. "I married him when Tommy was 6. 6 months after the wedding, everything changed. He started drinking more. Started asking whose eyes Tommy had, whose nose. The jealousy ate at him like poison." Derek's face twisted, but Sarah kept going. "The floodgates open now. First, it was just comments. 'That's not my kid. Why should I pay for another man's mistake?' Then he isolated us. Took my phone. Monitored who I talked to. Made me quit my job so I had no money of my own." Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then the hitting started. "Always Tommy. Never me where anyone could see. A slap for talking back. A punch for getting a B on a test. That black eye because Tommy asked if he could visit his grandmother." She looked at Jake with eyes that held 12 years of regret. "I tried to leave twice. Got as far as the bus station the first time. Derek found us, dragged us back. Said if I ever tried again, he'd make sure I never saw Tommy again. Said he'd tell the courts I was an unfit mother, and I believed him because by then I believed everything he said." She slid down to her knees. "I'm sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry." Derek wasn't listening to Sarah's confession. He was backing into the house, dragging Tommy with him, the boy's feet scrambling for purchase on the hardwood floor. "None of you are taking him!" Derek's voice climbed an octave, desperation bleeding into rage. "I've spent 2 years raising another man's brat, feeding him, housing him, putting up with his crying and his questions and his face. That's not mine. He owes me." Tommy tried to twist away, but Derek's grip was iron. Fingers digging into the boy's thin arm, hard enough to leave new bruises on top of old ones. "Mr. Hartman," Deputy Miller said, his hand moving deliberately toward his weapon, voice still controlled but carrying an edge now. "Release the child. This doesn't end well for you if you—" Derek slammed the interior door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. They heard the deadbolt slide home, then the chain lock, then something heavy being dragged across the floor, furniture barricading the entrance. Sarah screamed from where she knelt on the porch. "Tommy!" "Derek, please. Don't—" Jake was already moving, Brick beside him, but Miller grabbed Jake's vest. "Wait. Let me try negotiation first. If we breach without—" Jake's radio crackled. Chain's voice came through from his position around back, where he'd circled during the confrontation. "He's barricading. Kitchen door's got a chair wedged under the handle. I can see him through the window dragging the boy toward the stairs." Pause. Upstairs windows open. Northwest bedroom. Could be an escape route. Or could be a trap. Jake looked at Brick, and everything they'd been through together, 3 tours, riding side by side, bullets and blood and brotherhood passed between them, in a single glance. They'd breached crack houses in Oakland, meth labs in the mountains, had gone through doors when the odds said they'd die on the other side. They'd done it for strangers, for justice, for the code they lived by. This was Jake's son. No words were needed. Brick nodded once and turned to the crew. Tiny. Wrench, with me on the back door. Raven, stay with Sarah. Everyone else, perimeter. Nobody leaves this property. He looked at Deputy Miller. You can arrest us after we get the kid out. Miller's jaw worked for 3 seconds. Then he unclipped his radio. Dispatch. Suspect has barricaded himself inside with a minor hostage. Requesting additional units, but we're going in now. Exigent circumstances. He looked at Jake. I'm coming with you. Make it clean. Deputy Miller positioned himself at the front door, speaking through it in that trained negotiator voice, calm and reasonable. Derek, let's talk about this. Nobody needs to get hurt. Just open the door and we can work this out. Jake circled left with Brick, Tiny breaking right with Wrench. All of them moving with the practiced silence of men who'd done this before. Raven stayed with Sarah on the front lawn, holding the sobbing woman back while keeping her own eyes on the house. Reading the situation, ready to provide medical aid the second they breached. Miller kept talking, buying them time to get into position. Think about what you're doing, Derek. You're making this worse. Just open up and a crash from inside cut him off. Furniture being overturned, glass shattering. Derek's voice, high and breaking. Stay away from me. All of you, stay away. Then Tommy's voice, terrified and small. Let me go, please. I want my dad. Another crash. The sound of a child screaming. That was it. Jake's hand sliced through the air, the signal they'd all been waiting for. Tiny was already in position at the side door where chains had indicated the weakest point, the frame old and weather-worn. His size 16 boot met the wood just below the lock with 280 pounds of force behind it. The frame splintered like kindling. The door slamming inward, and they poured through Jake first. Brick right behind him. Tiny recovering his balance and following. Deputy Miller bringing up the rear with his weapon drawn. The kitchen was chaos. Chairs overturned, broken dishes scattered across tile, and Derek Hartman stood in the center of it, holding a kitchen knife. His eyes wild and unfocused, like an animal backed into a corner. Tommy wasn't with him. Where's my son? Jake's voice was granite. From somewhere to the left came pounding, small fists against wood. The pantry door. Tommy's voice muffled and desperate. I'm in here. He locked me in. Everyone stop, Derek screamed, waving the knife in wide arcs. He's not leaving with you. I've put 2 years into that kid, 2 years of my life. And he's not. Tiny moved. For a man his size, he was impossibly fast. Years of amateur boxing making him fluid where he should be lumbering. He stepped inside Derek's swing, grabbed the wrist holding the knife with his left hand, while his right came up in a controlled strike to Derek's solar plexus. The air rushed out of Derek's lungs. The knife clattered to the tile floor. Tiny had him face down on the ground in 3 seconds, knee in his back, hands being zip-tied with the flex cuffs. Brick tossed him. Clear, Tiny called. Deputy Miller stepped forward, weapon still drawn but pointed down, and began reading Miranda rights in that same calm voice he'd used for negotiation. Derek Hartman, you're under arrest for child abuse, domestic violence, false imprisonment, resisting arrest, and assault with a deadly weapon. Raven reached the pantry first, her EMT training overriding everything else. Assess, stabilize, extract. She dropped to her knees at the door, pulling a hairpin from her hair with practiced efficiency. Tommy? Sweetie, we're getting you out. Just hold on. Her hands worked the simple lock, the kind meant to keep toddlers out of cleaning supplies, not to withstand actual pressure. 15 seconds. 20. The lock clicked, and she pulled the door open. Tommy burst out like he'd been held underwater, 8 years old and 70 pounds of pure terror, his small body launching forward without thought or direction, just animal instinct seeking safety. His eyes landed on Jake standing 3 feet away, this tall man in leather with a reaper on his back, and something clicked in the boy's mind, some deep recognition that bypassed logic and went straight to his bones. He threw himself at Jake. Jake caught him, hands coming up automatically to support the small body that crashed into his chest. Tommy's arms wrapped around his neck in a death grip, legs circling his waist, and the boy buried his face in Jake's leather vest like he could disappear into it. He was shaking so hard Jake could feel it through all his layers, small tremors that wouldn't stop. "I knew you'd come," Tommy whispered into the leather, his voice muffled and breaking. "Mom showed me your picture once. It was a long time ago, but I remembered. She was crying and she said you were tough. Said you protected people who couldn't protect themselves." His grip tightened. "I knew if I could just find you, you'd come." Jake's eyes burned. His arms closed around his son, this boy he'd never held, never met, never known existed until yesterday, and something in his chest that had been broken for 12 years started to piece itself back together in jagged, painful ways. "I've got you, kid," he said, his voice rough and low. "I've got you now. Nobody's ever going to hurt you again." Tommy's whole body shuddered with a sob he'd been holding back. "Promise?" Jake looked at Brick, at Tiny standing over Derek's prone form, at Deputy Miller, and the crew surrounding them like a wall of leather and loyalty. He thought about the note, about the courage it took for an 8-year-old to ask a stranger for help. "I promise," Jake said. "On everything I am, I promise." The paramedics arrived at 9:34 a.m. Ambulance lights painting the neighborhood in rotating red and white. Raven had called them during the breach. Her EMT instincts knowing they'd need documentation, medical evidence that would hold up in court. She guided them to Tommy first, her voice professional as she briefed them on what she'd observed. The lead paramedic, a woman named Chen with kind eyes, knelt beside Tommy where he still clung to Jake. "Hey there, buddy. I'm Amy. I need to check you out. Make sure everything's okay. Is that all right?" Tommy looked at Jake, who nodded. "It's okay, kid. I'll be right here." They documented everything with clinical precision, while Raven photographed each injury for evidence. Black eye. Left side. Severe swelling and discoloration consistent with blunt force trauma within the last 12 hours. Split lower lip, requiring no stitches but showing fresh bleeding. Bruises on both upper arms in distinct finger pattern shapes, 4 on the left arm, matching an adult male grip, indicating forceful restraint. Older bruises on his ribs, legs, back evidence of systematic, prolonged abuse. Each injury was measured, photographed from multiple angles, documented in triplicate. Sarah's turn came next. She sat on the porch steps where she'd collapsed. And the second paramedic found what Jake already suspected. Older bruises on her upper arms, partially healed. Evidence of previous split lip, psychological trauma evident in her trembling hands, 1,000-yard stare, difficulty making eye contact. All of it documented, photographed, added to the growing mountain of evidence. Derek was hauled out in handcuffs at 9:47 a.m., still shouting. "That kid was nothing when I found him. I gave him a home. Deputy Miller's hand on his head guided him into the cruiser with zero gentleness. "Derek Wayne Hartman, you're being charged with multiple counts of child abuse, domestic violence, false imprisonment, resisting arrest, and assault on a peace officer." Miller's voice carried across the lawn, making sure every neighbor heard. Additional charges may be filed pending investigation. The cruiser doors slammed shut, cutting off Derek's protests. Neighbors emerged then, the ones who'd heard and never called, guilt written across their faces. Mrs. Patterson from next door approached Deputy Miller with shaking hands. "I heard things, shouting, the boy crying. I called once, but when the police came everything looked fine, and I thought, maybe I was wrong." She wiped her eyes. "I should have called again. I should have." "Ma'am," Miller said, not unkindly, "I need you to give a formal statement. Everything you heard, everything you saw. Can you do that?" She nodded. 3 other neighbors followed, each with their own fragments, hearing Tommy scream last Thursday, seeing Derek drag Sarah back into the house 2 months ago, noticing the boy stopped playing outside. The case was building itself. Brick by brick, witness by witness. Jake sat on the porch steps with Tommy beside him, the boy's small hand gripping his calloused one like a lifeline. They didn't speak. There weren't words big enough yet. Around them, the machinery of justice ground forward. But in this moment, they existed in a bubble of silence. Father and son, 12 years late, but finally together. County General Hospital smelled like antiseptic and broken promises. Tommy had been taken back for a full evaluation at 10:15 a.m. And now Jake sat in the waiting room beside Sarah. 12 years of silence, stretching between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross. The plastic chairs were uncomfortable. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Normal hospital sounds that felt absurd given the wreckage of their lives spread out between them. Sarah spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. For not telling you. For running." She stared at her hands, at the wedding ring she'd already removed and shoved in her pocket. "I thought. You were in jail, Jake. Running with dangerous people. The devil's spawn, guns, all of it. I wanted better for him. I thought I was protecting him by keeping him away from that life." Jake nodded slowly, his jaw working. "You got stuck in worse." She flinched but didn't argue. "I got out of that life, Sarah," he continued, his voice low and measured. "Been clean for 10 years. The Iron Brotherhood isn't the spawn. We run a legitimate security business through the club now. Contract work, event security, protection details, legal, above board." He turned to look at her. "I would have been there. If you'd told me, if you'd given me a chance, I would have been there for both of you." Sarah's face crumpled, and the tears came. 12 years of them, all the fear and loneliness and desperate choices spilling out. I know that now. I saw you with him today, and I know exactly what I took from both of you." Her hands covered her face. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry." He didn't reach for her. That bridge had burned long ago, and they both knew it, but his voice gentled. "We can't fix the past. We can only do better going forward. For Tommy," she nodded, wiping her eyes with shaking hands. The examination room door opened, and Tommy emerged with a nurse, small bandages on his face. His swollen eye cleaned and treated, but he was smiling slightly, a fragile expression that looked unpracticed but real. "The doctor says I'm going to be okay," he announced, and walked straight to Jake, taking his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. 3 weeks later, Jake stood in family court wearing the cleanest jeans he owned and a button-down shirt that felt like a straitjacket. Chains had used every connection from his 30 years on the force to fast-track the DNA results. And the document in Judge Patricia Morrison's hands contained the truth in clinical language. 99.97% probability of paternity. Tommy was biologically Jake's son. Sarah sat across the aisle in a simple dress, looking healthier than she had in years. The women's shelter had given her space to breathe. Mandatory counseling had given her tools to rebuild. And for the first time since Jake had seen her on that porch, she looked like the woman he'd once known. She'd submitted a statement to the court that made the bailiff wipe his eyes. She didn't want to keep Tommy from Jake anymore. Didn't want to repeat the mistakes that had cost them all so much. Judge Morrison reviewed the case with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too many broken families. Derek's criminal trial was set for August, and he'd been denied bail after prosecutors presented the mountain of evidence. The neighbor testimonies, the medical documentation. He'd be in county lockup for months, possibly years when this was done. The judge ordered joint custody with a structured plan, supervised visits at first, transitioning to flexible arrangements as Tommy adjusted. A court-appointed mediator helped Jake and Sarah hash out the details in a conference room that smelled like old coffee. Weekdays with Sarah as she got back on her feet. Found work, rebuilt stability. Weekends with Jake at the clubhouse. Holidays alternating. Summers flexible based on Tommy's needs and desires. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Two broken people trying to do right by a child who'd suffered for their failures. Tommy spent his first weekend at the clubhouse that Saturday, and 15 bikers who'd seen the worst humanity had to offer appointed themselves his family. Uncle Brick taught him to change oil. Uncle Tiny let him sit on his shoulders to feel tall. Aunt Raven made him sandwiches with the crusts cut off because that's how he liked them. He was learning to trust again, slowly. He laughed sometimes now, a sound that made Jake's chest ache with hope. 3 weeks wasn't enough time to heal 8 years of trauma, but it was a beginning. 6 months later, the Iron Brotherhood Clubhouse looked nothing like a biker bar and everything like a 9-year-old's dream birthday party. Streamers in blue and silver hung from the rafters. A massive cake shaped like a motorcycle sat on the main table, and 15 leather-clad bikers had collectively agreed that not a single beer would be cracked until the kid went home. Tommy stood in the center of it all, wearing the tiny leather vest. Raven had spent 3 weeks hand-stitching, patches declaring him Club Kid and protected by Iron Brotherhood MC across the back. He was laughing, really laughing, the sound carrying across the parking lot like music Jake had waited 9 years to hear. The therapy was working. Dr. Chen said Tommy was resilient, that children could heal if given safety and love and time. The nightmares had decreased from every night to once a week. The flinching had stopped. He'd made friends at his new school, and his teachers reported he was thriving. Sarah stood near the cake table talking to Raven, healthy now, working as a manager at a hardware store, and dating a guy named Michael, who was gentle and patient and understood why she needed to take things slow. She caught Jake's eye and smiled, a real smile that held gratitude and friendship, and the shared knowledge that they'd never be together again, but they'd always be united in protecting this boy. Tommy climbed onto Tiny's bike, the engine off, Tiny walking it forward at maybe 5 miles per hour, while Tommy gripped the handlebars and pretended to ride. His grin was so wide it looked like it might split his face, and Jake felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for 12 years. Brick appeared beside him, clapping his shoulder. "You did good, brother." Jake nodded, watching his son wave from the bike, watching the Brotherhood stand around them like a living wall of protection. That note had saved Tommy's life, pulled him out of hell and brought him home. But really, Tommy had saved Jake's, given him purpose beyond the club, beyond the rides and the Brotherhood and the code they lived by, given him redemption for the promise he'd made 12 years ago to Sarah to be there, to protect, to show up when it mattered. Better late than never. Tommy called out, "Dad, did you see? I'm riding!" And Jake's heart swelled with those words. Dad, his son, safe, home. The Iron Brotherhood stood behind them, forever vigilant, forever family. And Jake Morrison finally understood what it meant to keep a promise.